What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with Judeo-Christian values, real-world, first-hand experience. Today we're going to be talking about shotgun slugs. This is another installment of our Shotgun Nerd Out series. You can obviously listen to it however you want, as a standalone episode or in part of the series. Before we get into the topic, I want to say, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and becoming a patron. If you think the knowledge you gain in this episode is worth even the fraction of the cost of a box of slugs, even a slug in today's prices, consider going and supporting on Patreon. With that, I'll plug in the bio. You want to skip it? Skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where it starts, which will be almost to the 5-minute mark, I believe, when you're listening to this, if you want to skip ahead to there. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in L.A.P.D. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. F.B.I. certified firearms instructor, N.R.A, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an S.R.T. special response team in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. All right, let's talk about slugs, baby. What is a slug? What is a shotgun slug? It is a way to get a shotgun to fire one single projectile. You see, back in the day, there were smoothbore muskets, and there really wasn't a ton of differentiation between them. Had a 70-something or a 60-something or 50-something caliber smoothbore musket, and you wanted to load it with a round ball, you got one big projectile. When you wanted to load it with shot, you loaded it with a bunch of small round projectiles. But as rifling became a thing and specialized rifles, the Kentucky long rifle, breech loading rifle became a thing, you got this bifurcation between rifles and shotguns, which is great. But what's a man to do when he's out with his shotgun and he wants to fire at one single projectile? Well, Foster and Bernecki, which we'll get to later, tried to solve this problem, and they come up with some different solutions. And both of those are versions of a slug. And a slug, again, is just a way to get your shotgun to fire at one single projectile. Now let's talk about some different kinds of slugs. Now, likely, if you're an American and you're familiar with slugs, what you're picturing in your head is a Foster slug. You know, you go down to Walmart, you go down to, I don't know, do they still have Kmart's that sell ammo? You go down to wherever it is you buy your ammo, your local gun store, and likely what you're going to find is a 12 gauge, a 20 gauge Foster style slug, named for the man that invented them. And if you look at this design, the only way I can kind of describe it is, you know the candy dots? They kind of look like a big gumdrop that's a little elongated. Picture if you hollowed that out and put a dimple in the top, and then cut some grooves in it. If you've never seen one by itself, I would suggest next time you buy a box of slugs, taking one and cutting it out, and just checking it out and seeing what it is. So let's get into a little bit of why it's designed this way. Shotguns, although they're called a 12 gauge, and theoretically that should be a precise measurement, they range widely in the size of the actual bore. To get a slug to fit precisely down that, it needed to have some give. And kind of like the Minet ball in the Civil War in the days of old, a little bit smaller than the bore, but when it fires, that pressure widens out the base of that slug, which is why it's hollow, to grab the outside of that barrel to give you a more precise shot. Which would all be fine and dandy, except remember, most shotguns have chokes. So what happens when the slug hits the choke? Well, it has to give some. And in order for it to give, it has these rings, what are called rifling. That's why you'll generally see it called a rifled slug. They have these grooves cut into it, much like a rifled barrel has grooves cut into it. But these grooves are cut into the projectile, not the barrel. And they do two things. They allow that to squeeze down to a smaller size without blowing up your gun. Pretty important. And they are supposed to help that rifle spin when it goes through the air. To the degree to which they do that and the amount of gyroscopic stability that departs on said projectile is a matter of debate. I seem to think it does work because, just in my experience, the amount of accuracy I achieve out of a good rifled slug is pretty astounding. And I have to think that it has some kind of gyroscopic stability. But I'm not a physicist. I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. And occasionally I talk about guns. But that's pretty much the design features. Most of them will have a small dimple in the top, much like a hollow point in a bullet. Because it's soft lead, they do tend to expand fairly well and deform fairly well. They're just so although it may look just like a big hunk of lead in there, there's quite a bit of engineering that goes into that. And hats off to the man that invented it and people that produce them well. I'll give honor to whom honor is due. Another man figured out a way to do this as well, and his name was Bernecki. Bernecki, however you want to pronounce it. He had a slightly different method. These Bernecki slugs tend to be more solid. They tend to have big grooves cut in the side as well for the same reason, to let them go through a choke. But in order to keep them sealed and flying straight and going down the barrel, their wad is attached to them in the rear, much like the fletchings on an arrow are attached to an arrow to help it fly straight. The Bernecki slug and the wad are kind of one piece, kind of like a shotgun arrow flying out there. And they don't have a giant hollow base, at least from what I understand. And for this reason, since they're a more solid chunk of lead, they have a reputation for being very good penetrators, even among slugs, which in and of themselves are very good penetrators. But they're known for deep penetration on dangerous game, have quite a good reputation. Now these are the Euro style slugs, and I actually don't own any, even though I really like them. And I've thought about buying them, and I haven't, even though I think that they're a better design, if I'm being honest. But I don't have any because I like to be prepared, and I like to be able to get ammo and train with ammo. And I can't ever remember, can't say ever, but I don't remember the last time that I saw those in a store. I certainly don't think I've ever seen them at a Walmart or a big store where I get most other shotgun slugs. But if you were pressing me, I'd say it's probably a better design. It's just not what we're familiar here with in America. And again, that's the Foster versus a Bernanke style slug. If you're just talking about a slug, a pumpkin ball, it's often referred to, at least in the Southeast, in common vernacular, you're probably thinking of a Foster style slug. A Winchester Super X, a Federal Power Shock, whatever Remington calls their version. That's probably what you're thinking of, just a rifled Foster slug. Let's talk about sabot slugs, and I hope to clear up some misunderstanding for a lot of novices here. A sabot slug is a slug encased in some kind of sleeve, usually plastic, and it's sub-caliber. It's smaller than the caliber, or the gauge, I should say. It's smaller than the gauge in this case. Times the military uses in a 50 cal machine gun or in a tank round or whatever. But the same basic principle for the sabot round. You are shooting a projectile smaller than the caliber of the shotgun. Plastic sleeve around it. Why would you want to do this? Well, to get around government regulation. That's really the reason these exist, I believe, and really the only reason I know that they exist. Some states, some counties, for whatever reason, decided that it was not safe to hunt with rifles, but it was safe to hunt with shotguns. So, as a way to engineer around the regulation, stay within the law, but kind of skirt around it, design these sabot slugs. Crunch your own numbers, do your own ballistics, but basically turning, a 12 gauge to 20 gauge slug into something akin or something similar to a 45-70 or somewhere about in there. Shooting a 45 caliber is a real common projectile size. Since you're shooting a smaller projectile, it's probably going to go faster, and it is going to have a flatter trajectory. This will give you a lot greater range. In order to do this, and this is a big misunderstanding, not that you can't, but these are meant to be fired. Sabot slugs, non-rifled slugs, are meant to be shot through a rifled barrel. A fully rifled barrel, a lot of times in a specialty shotgun with a scope on it, you're basically turning your shotgun back into a rifle. Because you're giving it rifling and you're designing it to shoot one big projectile, a specialty projectile, to make it more in line with what a rifle does. To me, I don't see the point of these for anything except for if you live in a place that regulates that you have them. They're still not, as good as a dedicated rifle. One of the great things about the shotgun is its flexibility and the fact that I can go out and I can take a grouse or a deer or a black bear or a mourning dove. And you can't really do that with these specialty shotguns. You're getting a shotgun to get around some regulations to do one thing, to give you the maximum advantage on shooting deer-sized game at longer distances. Again, for regulation's sake, to kind of get around those. And they're meant to be fired again through a rifled barrel. Sabot slugs, rifled barrel. The Foster slugs and the Bernanke slugs we talked about are meant to be fired through a smoothbore, regular shotgun barrel with or without a choke. A lot of times they'll say don't fire them through a full choke. Plenty of people have, but it's not recommended generally. It'll usually say on the manufacturer's thing of slugs, and it usually specifies what choke they can be fired through, and a lot of times they recommend open or cylinder bore or improved cylinder, and a lot of times they'll say improved cylinder gives you the best accuracy. Again, shotguns, we've said in past episodes, you have to pattern for yourself. Just like a lot of modern shotguns have removable chokes, sometimes they will give you an option for a rifled choke tube. And some people do say that these will greatly increase accuracy in your shotgun if you're shooting slugs. But again, one of the things I love about the shotgun is the ability to take out, let's say, buckshot and put in a slug if I'm using it for defense or as a police officer in the past. The ability to shoot number 4 buck in heavy brush, or if I see something farther away, load in a slug. Can't really do that if I get specialized and start putting rifling in my shotgun. Again, it kind of negates the flexibility for me. But Understand that Foster and Bernanke slugs are meant to be shot through a regular shotgun. Regular, I mean a smooth bore. And Sabo slugs are meant to be fired through a rifled barrel gun with rifling. Now, could you shoot a Sabo slug through a regular shotgun? Sure, you could. Would it kill somebody if they were 10 feet in front of the muzzle? I'm sure that it probably would if you got a good shot. But that's not what they were designed for. I could paint my house with a toothbrush if I was so inclined. But a roller, but a paint roller would be far more effective. It's the right tool for the job. Those Sabo slugs are designed for rifle barrels. Now let's get into some numbers for your common Foster slugs. The most common weight I believe you're going to find is going to be 1 ounce. I'm looking here at a box of Federal. This is kind of my go-to slug round for a lot of things. It's a Federal rifled slug. I probably got it at Walmart or Sportsman's Warehouse or something like that, or I ordered it off Midway USA. It's a very common loading. You're likely to find it at any of those places. 1 ounce rifled slug at 1610 feet per second. Now you may see the velocity go up or down a little bit on common loads, but this is a real common loading in this ballpark, whether we're talking Federal or Winchester Super X or whatever the Remington version of this is. 1 ounce slug at 1600 and some odd feet per second, 1600, 1650, something like that. It's not even a plus P, it's not even a Magnum slug, it's just a regular slug that you would get, again, from Walmart or Sportsman's Warehouse or the local gun store because you want to support local business. I'm all about that. That's a real common loading. And that is what I want to get across to you here talking about these numbers. That is a massive amount of power. That is a massive amount of stopping power. That is much more powerful than most other things that you're going to see. Than your scary, AR-15 assault rifle. It's much, much more powerful than that. A regular off-the-shelf from Walmart box of slugs. Far more powerful. Look at the numbers. Far more powerful than pretty much any other small arm that you're going to have, counting like a giant 20-pound, 50 cal BMG or something that most people can't afford and are impractical and are pretty much useless except for target shooting. But for the common person, that's one of the most powerful rounds you're probably ever going to see or shoot. A 12-gauge slug, just because it's common, doesn't mean it's not effective and doesn't mean it's not a powerhouse. Again, your 1 ounce slug at 1610 feet per second is pretty common. I'm looking at a box of Luxor. These are really cheap imported slugs, and to be honest, they're kind of horrible. They tend to lead my bore like crazy. Anyway, it says 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, and these are 1 1/8 ounce. 1 1/8 ounce is also 1 1/8 ounce is also a fairly common loading. And the reason I have these boxes in front of me, guys, is because I'm doing this off grid, so I don't have Google or anything like that. I'm going to upload it when I go hang out with the people in civilization. But 1 1/8 ounce and 1 1/4 ounce is also a fairly common loading. Now this 1 1/8 ounce load, again, it's nothing special. I bought them because they were cheap, and they're advertised at 1345 feet per second. But again, it's heavier. It's 1 1/8 ounce. And I also have a box here of one of my go-to slugs, again, Federal True Ball, which I'll talk about that hopefully a little bit later. But the True Ball slugs, and these are the deep penetrators. Deep penetrator, you think that's like a powerhouse. Don't be deceived by marketing. I do really like this load, but it's a 1 ounce slug, and it's at 1350 feet a second. You're like, whoa, wait a second. That's quite a bit slower than the just regular off-the-shelf Walmart slugs. And they're deep penetrators with a bear on the box, so it's good. But they are deep penetrators, and I did get them, and I do have quite a few of them and have shot a number of them. This is a pretty common loading, not necessarily the deep penetrator, but this weight and velocity and law enforcement slugs and low recoil slugs. Why? We talked about the massive amount of power that the slug has. Well, if something is dead, it's dead. It's not like 50% deader with higher velocity slug. A 1 ounce slug at 1350 feet per second is still way, way more than enough power to kill pretty much any game or any person. They backed a little bit off. Why? So you don't get beat up so much. So you can do faster shot to shot if you're shooting multiple targets and things like that. You'll see that pretty common in law enforcement. The reason I like this load in particular, a couple reasons. The big one is I like to train, if you haven't understood that from past episodes. You can shoot a lot of regular shot shells through a shotgun, and you pretty much just get some plastic fouling. It's not a big deal. But you start shooting slugs through a shotgun, even a good chrome-lined shotgun barrel, and you can get some massive lead deposits. These deep penetrators are copper-coated. I like to think that the little bit of extra money I pay for the copper coating pays for itself in cleaning giant chunks of lead out of the bore. Now, if you're not going to shoot a lot of slugs, probably that doesn't matter. But I do really like when I can find them, the Federal True Ball. And the Federal True Balls, I don't think that's just marketing. What that is like a polymer ball in the base of the slug. And remember we talked before about the gas pushing the sides of that slug into the walls of the barrel? Well, the way I believe this is designed to work, and again, I'm not a rocket scientist or a ballistician, but there's a piston in back of this giant plastic ball, and it shoves up and shoves that ball into the base of the slug, and that makes it expand into the sides of your barrel. Whether this actually works or not, I don't know, but in my experience, the true ball rifled slugs tend to be very accurate. In fact, out of my Benelli, like scary rifle level accurate. So whether it's the fact that it has a true ball in it, or whether it's the fact that it's just good, solid, consistent ammo, I don't know, but they're some of my favorite loads to shoot. Again, the Bernecki slug, I've seen reports of them getting great accuracy, but because they're not common, and I'm a prepper and I like to watch and be ready, as Jesus tells us to watch and be ready. I don't generally have those or stock those because they're harder to find here in America, but I think it's a fine design. If you wanted to buy a couple of cases of them and train with them and shoot them, I think they're a good design. They're known for being good penetrators. If you were going to Alaska and this was your bear gun, you might want to get some Bernecki slugs. For that, it might be worth it. If you're talking giant coastal Alaskan brown bears, a few extra inches of penetration may not matter. A Foster slug will probably kill them stone dead, but, for that, why not? Or if you want to stop an engine block. It's one of the reasons I keep these Federal deep penetrators loaded in and attached to the shotgun I have in the truck, my truck gun. Deep penetration, not so much for an adversary, but for an adversary's vehicle, certainly. We talked about the power. If you look at the penetration of slugs versus a lot of other projectiles, their penetration just on a regular old, again, Walmart box of slugs is very impressive. You would think surely like a .308 round is better, but not always, because it's going at such a high velocity. If it hits something, it can, and a lot of times does, break apart. And when it breaks apart, you kind of lose that ability to penetrate. A slug, even though it's a big hunk of lead traveling at a moderate velocity, it tends to hit and stay on a straight line path. And because it's not going crazy fast, it doesn't tend to split apart or do things like that. It will stay in one big solid chunk, and it's a big hunk of lead. So its ability to penetrate and push stuff out of the way is pretty astounding. There's a lot of applications for this. We talked about in the hunting world, bear defense. Let's talk about it in tactical applications. We talked a little bit about stopping vehicles, shooting engine blocks. If I had a vehicle coming at me, that would be a good choice to have if I had to stop a vehicle, would be a 12-gauge slug. It does a 12-gauge slug does a lot of damage. Turning cover into concealment. A rifle slug, just a regular slug we've talked about, will go through a lot of things that a lot of other rounds will not go through. That can have a real advantage in a tactical application, so think about that. And don't discount A good shotgun loaded with buckshot and slugs, don't think that it's somehow inferior to an AR because it's not as cool looking on Instagram, or because politicians, for whatever reason, don't get all worked up about it. Again, hearkening back to my time as a police officer. I was an instructor for the department. I'm an F.B.I. certified firearms instructor. I had access to all manner of guns, counting submachine guns and full auto M4s and all kinds of things. But in general, if I was going into a building to clear it and I wanted to come out alive on the other side, I took a shotgun. Not even a fancy shotgun. An 870 with buckshot and slugs. Why? Because I didn't care what was super cool on Instagram. I cared what was going to keep me alive and what was best for that application. And I believe, and still do, what's best for that application is a shotgun with slugs and buckshot. Don't be misled by marketing or by what looks cool or what's even fun to shoot at the range. I love having fun at the range. I love plinking. I love all that stuff. I've been very blessed to be a good shooter. I love winning shooting competitions, the vast majority of which with a pistol. But a shotgun is a devastating tool, and if it comes to having my life on the line, a shotgun is a lot of times the best choice. Again, don't discount it because it's not cool looking, or it doesn't cost a buttload of money, or, the gun bunnies on Instagram aren't posing with it. That doesn't mean it's not a deadly and effective tool. Your life is worth more than being dissuaded by marketing. With that, I think I'm going to draw this episode to a close. Man, I encourage you to do a lot of research into slugs. There's a lot bigger world. There's all kinds of manner of slugs, all different loadings. Again, test them in your gun. With that, I want to say thanks for listening. Please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and supporting on Patreon. Patrons get special content that you guys don't get. Why? Because they step up and support the podcast. They get to be part of a really cool insider chat where it's not just me, it's them helping me and helping each other, and me chiming in and helping them. Giving advice, iron sharpens iron. I don't know everything about everything. A lot of guys on there have a lot more knowledge in certain areas, even gun areas, than I do. And I'm humbled to be a part of that chat. If you want to be a part of that chat, become a patron. Also, they get some special content. And some of that content, if you listened to the Survival Gun series, I did a special episode just for patrons on guns for the zombie apocalypse. A super serious and relevant and germane topic to today. But only patrons get access to that. Also, as soon as I'm done recording this, I plan on recording an episode on specialty shotgun rounds. Again, just for patrons. Talking door breaching. I'm talking, the Dragon's Breath rounds. Improvised shotgun rounds. Things like that. And again, that's going to be for the patrons. If you think that's worth the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo, and mostly because you believe in the message and you think this content is worth it, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and becoming a patron. All right, man. As a thanks for listening to all of that, the tactical tip of the day. Don't eat yellow snow. I'm just kidding. That's not the tactical tip of the day. But it's a good tip. I'm just in a goofy mood. Tactical tip of the day, we talked about lead in a shotgun barrel, and it can get pretty bad. You can get pretty frustrated with normal shotgun cleaning stuff trying to get the lead out of a shotgun barrel, even with a regular bronze brush with all those bristles. There is a brush, and I get no kickback from these guys. They're not sponsored by them. I think it's Hops who makes it, but it's called a tornado brush. It's a stainless steel brush, and it's not made like normal brushes where the bristles stick out. They're kind of curled back on themselves in what looks kind of like a tornado. It's called a tornado brush. And that seems to work very well, and it will relieve a lot of frustration and possibly you flinging your shotgun barrel across the room because you're mad because you can't get the lead out of it. Obviously, it'll work on a lot of other fouling too, but it's a stainless steel Hops tornado brush. They're not expensive. They're $3, $4, $5. If you plan on shooting a lot of slugs and a lot of lead slugs, I would really look into that. Another tactical tip of the day. Federal has a ballistics calculator online that's free, and they list factory loads, and they don't just list rifle loads. They have their shotgun loads on there. So if you're shooting a federal shotgun slug, or even another slug that's very similar in velocity and everything, you can get your trajectory on there, write that down or print that out, and keep that with your shotgun. So you know what the best range to zero it is, and it'll even let you adjust for what range you zero it. and then what the different holds are. Let's say, and I'm just making this up, I'm not looking at my chart. It's 1.5 inches high at 25, it's dead on at 50, and it's 4 inches low at 100. Just like the dope on your rifle, you can have that figured, and you can have that taped to the side of your shotgun. So if you don't pick it up for a couple months and you go out to go hunting with it, you know. There's your tactical tips of the day. All right, men, the tactical verse of the day fits right in with today's topic. Let us go to the book of Leviticus. Therefore I said unto the children of Israel, no soul of you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that sojourns among you eat blood. And whatsoever man there be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourneth among them, who taketh in hunting any beast or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out the blood thereof, and cover it with dust. As you heard in my background, I've done quite a bit of hunting, professional hunter, hunted for food since I was a young man. One of the things I like to do when I get up to a beast that I have slain is slit its throat and let the blood come out. Most importantly, because the Bible says so. God wouldn't tell you to do something if it wasn't good for you. Getting rid of that blood will also help that meat keep better, make it taste better, in my opinion. Get the blood out of the veins, especially if the animal's heart is still pumping. You slit the throat, it gets a massive amount of that blood out of there. Or if you can quickly hoist it up with the rear legs up, which a lot of people like to do. Probably not doing that if it's an elk or a bison, unless you have a tractor. But with a deer or something like that, if you can hoist it up into a tree or its back legs up and slit its throat, much of that blood will run out. Let it run out, cover it with dirt. With that, men, thanks for listening to this installment of the Shotgun Nerd Out series. I know we get really in-depth here. I appreciate all of you that listen, and I'm humbled by all of you that are patrons. And very blessed. Thanks, men. Have a blessed day.